Moon knew what dreams are, of course. She had the knowledge of thousands at her fingertips, but Idorators did not sleep, not really. Idorators were not supposed to dream, and yet, the sun, the wind, the golden black grass swaying gently at her feet. If it wasn't for the haze around her mind and the fact that she knew that she never truly touched any of these things before, she could have thought it was real. It was empty and quiet here. Something red brushed up against her leg, or was it white? It never quite solidified into something she could see. It was there, and yet it wasn't. It was nice. It wasn't cold or damp or claustrophobic like her puppet chamber had become. This is somewhere that she wanted to stay, where she could stare up at the sun, uncovered for the threatening clouds that were nowhere to be seen. Maybe she waited long enough, she would be able to see the stars too. She wanted that. She wanted to see the galaxies and planets fold out before her with her own eyes. She was content to wait. This was calmer than it had been in a long time. Somewhere in the distance, figures flowed through the grass like fog. Only just barely there. Pink, green, and orange. White and gray, too. Familiar, but ghostly. Were they having fun? She hoped so. She was their big sister after all. After everything. They deserved a little bed downtime. After. Waking up wasn't like rebooting. It wasn't a sudden shock to her system, or a quiet eternal diagnostic as things activated and drew her up to consciousness. This was so much slower than she was used to. Slower even than getting her bearings after she had gained back the first neuron. The first things that came back was her touch. It was cold and wet. Soaking wet. Like it always was after a cycle of rain. Her dress clung to her metal chassis and pooled water underneath her body. She shivered. Everything felt weak, and she couldn't even muster the strength to push herself into a sitting position again. Not yet, anyways. Her hands twitched. Fingers digged into the metal slag built up around her. Next was hearing. Water lapped gently across her eyelid as it always did, and dripped from the ceilings of her already waterlogged body. The metal of her can creaked and groaned as always, but somehow it seemed louder than it had before. Somewhere above her was the soft buzz of her neurons floating about. Hopefully all accounted for this time. Finally, she opened her eyes. Of course, nothing had changed. The view of her chamber was still the same as always. Metal, water, and the rare patch of moss or grass. Droplets gathered in the divots between the wreckage before falling into the water below, sending ripples that faded into the gentle wave of the water. It was all the same, but no. No, wait, something had changed. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. She couldn't feel her can. At all. With her limited power before she could feel much, but she did feel, brushed against the ravaged systems, jolts of biomechanical muscle trying to send signals back and forth, but sending only sparks. It was so very little compared to before, but it was feeling, even if only enough to give her a near constant ache, flashes of pain she no longer responded to. That was gone now. It was all gone. She had never felt so empty. Her mind desperately reached for the systems that were simply not there anymore. She could feel the frantic buzz of her neurons as they tried to connect to the systems, and if she focused, she could maybe feel the distinct tug of her servos and cogs, but not much more. She was disconnected. Alone. Her outer layers had been shulked away, leaving only this feeble puppet core, weak and shivering, without layers upon layers of metal to be used as a shield as it was a prison. Yet, she felt awake now. Sluggish and disoriented, yes, but awake. Like she had been drawn from a long coma once more. She felt that she had forgotten some things again, but the memory she held now was no longer foggy and clouded like the skies above. She was present. The aches and pains of her broken can have simply disappeared now, leaving her free of the twists and pulses from deep inside of her. She had never felt worse, and yet, this moment, in a shocking turn of fate, she had never felt better either. Was this how the ancients had felt? Feebly, she reached back to find the cause of this new development. Her fingers found the wires that had been exposed and, they fell limply to the side as she clutched at them. She remembered what happened now. Sugar, the rains, the floods, the wires to her umbilical snapping with a rush of something that was both incredible pain and all-consuming numbness. Sugar. Sudden thought of her friends forced her muscles into action, shaking with the effort. She drew her arms under herself and heaved towards after that. She pulled in her legs and leaned forward, settling into a familiar lopsided sitting position as she often did. It was usually harder than that, and now that she thought of it, she had to contend with her umbilical before. A sensitive glance back confirmed it all. The long metal rail now laying limply a few feet away. The remains of her wires hanging from the inner cavity. It was almost sickening. She had thought it would have been a bad idea to look. No time for that. Another look told her that she was alone. No blob of white anywhere to be seen. In the water or upon her island. With a twist of sorrow, she realized the poor thing must have drowned. It wasn't surprising, of course. She knew the moment that it came back to her, it most likely would. But it still hurt her deep inside her chest. She never wanted the little creature to be hurt. Especially because she had talked so long. She shouldn't have got so lenient with the time that she allowed Sugar to spend there. A whine slipped from her vocal cords as she slumped forward into her own lap, dragging her hands up to her antenna as she pinned them back in dejection. Her fault, as usual. Even in her sadness, however, it was impossible to miss the loud kerplunk in the room outside of her chambers as something hit the water heavily. The sound of a particularly ungrateful fall, then loud splashing. She drew herself up as it went quiet for all but 2 seconds before a white blur was diving over the divider into her room. With a sharp gasp and flood of relief, she realized who it was before she even scrambled into the shore. "Sugar!" She cried in joy, opening her arms. The little creature had only barely pulled itself back from bawling over her completely. Its tiny paws were all over her in an instant. Grabbing at her dress, her arms, her cheeks and antenna, as if it had not been the one who drowned despite her protests. The instant it found her wires, it made a high noise of distress, pawing at them before Moon managed to pull it away. "Sugar! No, stop! It's okay! I'm alive! She said quickly, keeping her friend at arm's length. It made a whine, eyes darting from her back up to her neurons, and back to her. She sighed, allowing it to push up to her chest and purr softly as she petted gently at the back of its head. "I've been disconnected from my can, it seems, but I am still alive. I can only imagine it's likely my neurons are granting me energy at the moment," she told it. She looked up at said neurons as they drifted around to their heads, and yes, it seems they were all accounted for. "I cannot feel my can anymore. It's barely a distant brush, and now I'm not sure how to feel. It's so empty, and yet I've never been more aware. I suppose that must be because my neurons no longer have to contend with the entire can to divert consciousness to. Just me," she said quietly. Sugar looked around, making a vague gesture with a look of concern. "If you're asking me what I'm going to do now, I don't know. It's only just thinking that I am free. I don't know what to do with that freedom now," she said. Sugar shifted back and forth, its eyes darting around as it churned gears in its head. After a minute, it slowly reached out and pointed towards the exit and then upwards. Moon took a second to parse what the little one was saying before jolting up. "Are you saying that you want us to go to 5 Pebbles?" she asked, almost incredulously. Sugar looked unsure, but eventually nodded. There was the fact of the relationship that she and Pebbles had, first of all, but after that was the ordeal of even getting there. They had to leave her can, first of all, then they had to cross over the water to get to Pebbles, then they actually had to get up to Pebbles. After which they would have to deal with the rot, the gravity, and all manner of things, all the while trying to avoid the predators with her, who had never actually walked before. Well, not without her umbilical, anyway. Well, what else was there to do? Sit here and continue to rot away? Wait and see if the rain would truly kill her in this state? She was free now. She really was not even going to try, and in any case, she did want to see her brother, if only to give him a piece of her mind. With a deep inhale, she made up her mind and nodded. "All right, little one, to Pebbles it is. But I must warn you, bringing me will not be an easy task. I'm not so sure how well I could walk. I've never actually swam before. Do you understand this?" she said gently. Immediately, Sugar nodded, taking her hands and pulling at her. It was obvious what it was trying to do, so after a moment of hesitation, she unfolded her legs and began to stand. The inexperience was plain to see, wobbling violently for a moment and only steadied by Sugar grabbing onto her waist. Clutching her friend by the shoulders, she just barely managed to pull herself to her full height, and after a couple of seconds, stopped shaking so much. Slowly, Sugar pulled away. She stayed somewhat steadily. Another moment, then she moved a foot forward. 1 step, 2 steps. She stumbled, and Sugar was there ready to steady her once again, but the motion was still there. It was beyond odd, without her umbilical, but she had a start. Still, she gave Sugar a sheepish look. "It's a start, but I may need to use you as a crutch," she apologized. Sugar nodded, and gently pulled her towards the water. Again, she stopped. "Wait, Sugar, I don't know how to swim. How will we—" She made a vague gesture to the water. The little creature paused to think, but with a triumphant look, turned and thumped its tail on the ground. Moon's eyes widened. "Do you want to drag me along using your tail?" she asked. Proudly, Sugar nodded. Well, it was certainly one way of doing it, and well, it seemed to do the job just fine. Moon was stuck somewhere between terror and excitement as they left her chamber. It was strange just being there. Puppets never left their chambers. Iterators never left their cans. It was an irrefutable fact of life, yet here she was, doing just that. Her programming would have just screamed at the mere thought of it. An odd feeling just rushed through her, wondering what their creators would have thought. She giggled. The channel lit up and away from the chamber, and in the end they got through with it, with Sugar pushing her in first, then coming in after to help push her up through it. Luckily for them, her neurons followed loyally behind. Steadily, they worked their way through the passages. Sugar gave one of them a considering look, but shook its head before pushing her in with a nudge on her bottom. She nearly immediately regretted her decision when they came to the next room, the exit pipe leading out and onto a long way down. She glanced sharply back, and Sugar looked apologetic at her and made a clinging motion with its arms and legs. Reluctantly, she followed the instructions, clinging to the pipe and shimmying across it with her arms and legs. It seemed like forever before they got to another set of passages across the way, unfortunately leading to yet another precarious down drop, dealt with by Sugar guiding her down and swinging her across to safe ground. Luckily for her poor heart, after that it was only another passage, and they dropped down into water. She was less than grateful in it, but wasn't sure that Sugar had seen it anyways. After that, it was swimming, another passage, more swimming, and so on and so forth. At points, heaven forbid that they were forced underwater entirely, and she had to be glad for how well her friend could swim. By the end of the ordeal, she was more than sure that she was sick of water. If she never saw it again, it would be too soon. Iterators were not built to swim, and frankly, by this point, she thought that anyone who liked the hobby had lost all their damned pearls. It was only the bare shed of sensibilities that kept her from grumbling as she pulled along with the next passage, idly wondering what the next problem would be if she ever flopped out of it, annoyed and heavy with water and... Oh. She had seen the sun before, through her overseers. Of course she had, but this was not that. Not at all. Golden light spilled through the sky, rays shining down through massive clouds drifted through the air, lighting them up as something that looked like heaven. Light speckled the ground when it broke through the clouds, highlighting every speck of the ground they touched. The metal of her can glimmered like it had just been built. There were no words for its beauty. She could only explain her feelings of the moment as a religious experience, because truly, who could have molded such sight but a god? Looking up, she couldn't help but wonder how in the world has she ever settled for less? Why has their creators kept them from this? How could they? Her eyes drew down. Ah, more water. Damn it.